Good evening and welcome everyone out there in our virtual town hall meeting. We are here tonight to talk all things transportation as part of the SA Tomorrow Multimodal Transportation Plan. Before we get too far into it, we just want to do a quick technical check. If you're on your computer listening or watching and can hear us right now, we'd appreciate it if you would type something into your chat box or raise your hand on your virtual screen so we know that we're coming through loud and clear. Okay, it appears that we are good and everyone can hear us. We've got a panel tonight to talk about transportation. First, I'm your moderator, Jeff Coyle with the City of San Antonio. We're joined by Daryl Bird, who is the managing principal of Ultrate Consulting, which is a strategic consulting and master planning firm. We're joined by Councilman Ron Nirenberg. And we're joined by Dr. Afamia Alnikat. The three I just mentioned are the tri-chairs of the SA Tomorrow Transportation Planning effort. We're also joined by Councilman Ray Lopez, who is the chairman of the MPO, which is our Regional Metropolitan Planning Organization. So four experts here to talk transportation with us. Let's go through a few of the practicalities tonight about how we're going to do this. We've started the town hall meeting. We're going to answer your questions from home, and there's a few different ways that you can ask them. The first is if you want to ask something verbally, you can raise your hand on your virtual screen there. There's a function to raise your hand. We'll recognize that you want to ask a question and get to you when we can. The second way is to simply type your question into the chat box. We'll read it out here and answer it. We're going to answer each and every question. Even if we don't get to them all tonight in the hour that we're joining you here, we will answer them in due time and post them for everyone to see. A couple of ground rules. We want to respect what everybody has to say and each other's opinions. There really are no dumb questions when it comes to transportation, just dumb moderators. And we want to keep all of the discussions and questions focused on the topic of transportation, not on a personal level, not necessarily about your street, but about streets in San Antonio and how we move people around. And we want to be concise so that we can get to all the questions and topics and give everyone a chance to participate. Finally, if you're having any technical difficulty during the virtual town hall meeting, you can call a number that we've got on the screen here for you, 334-1996, to try to address the technical problem. You can also email Jackie Lopez and Michelle Martinez. Their emails are on the screen right away. So let's get right into the questions. Do we have one to start with here? Well, let me jump into to one broad question. We're talking a lot about streets. So what makes the perfect street as we think about the future of San Antonio? What does a San Antonio street look like in terms of how we want to move people around in the future? Daryl looks like he's really excited to address that first question.
Thank you, Jeff. And thanks to all of you across the state who are tuning in. This event today is really about you. It's really about your vision and your dreams for the city. And even more importantly, it's about how you believe we need to prioritize ourselves in the city, policy making, and allocation of resources to get that done. So I'm really honored to be with these folks, but also in your company as well. So what makes a great street? You know, I think there probably have many definitions of that. Streets are obviously not just to service automobiles. Sometimes we default to that position, but streets belong to everybody. They're about getting places efficiently where we want to go from A to B. That's walking, that's other types of mobility like cycling, like wheeling for those who have mobility challenges. It's also about connectivity of the neighborhoods that make our city all across America, San Antonio, notwithstanding the great city, about connection, without ease of access, without having choices.
Councilman Nirenberg, you want to?
Yeah, I would say similar things. For me, when I think about what's the perfect street in San Antonio, the first thing I think about is one that we can maintain. You know, we need to design streets in a way that we can afford the life cycle of those streets. The other thing is we need to think broadly in terms of how we connect people to people, places to places, so a good street is connected, as Daryl said. And then the third thing thing is we also need to think in more broadly in terms of the modes that people use, whether it's a bus pad or it's a traditional automobile or it's a bicycle lane or it's pedestrian access or a connection to some other multimodal sort of facility. Streets are ways that we connect people and places, but they also do much more for us if we do it right than simply limit the user to one particular mode of travel.
Dr. Elnicott?
All my associates here said it all, but I used to think the shortest distance, the definition of a line from point A to point B, that is the street I want to be on. It's about efficiency for me, but more so in our city, when my daughter is in my car, it's about safety. And when it's congested, when its impact on air quality and public health is severe, to me, you lose that sense of safety. So to me, it's about efficiency and safety.
Councilman Lopez, I know you're dealing with this at the MPO on a monthly basis.
We're dealing with it constantly, and kind of difficult to go forth on when we're reading out a litany of things that make a good street. But the reality, but I think most of us, to your point, Doctor, is that we want to be able to get on a street and be able to get from point A to point B within the expected period of time. Sometimes, perhaps at 7, 8 o'clock in the morning, we realize we're going to be slowed down just a little bit. We also expect that when the traffic peaks are down, we should get through quicker. I think we struggle with trying to build roads that meet expectations to everybody's standard. We're never going to be able to get everybody everywhere as quickly as they want to get there. But if we can deal with them in a cost-effective manner and be able to build them wide enough and fast enough to be able to meet those needs, I think the community will benefit from it. And those benefits are getting from point A to point B safely, being able to have a good environment from an environmental perspective. Well, Ryan, you've done a lot of work in air quality review for our community. I've done a lot of work in that as well, and the entire community is interested in how we go about viewing transportation and how it's going to affect our environment. So, I mean, a good street is going to get us from point A to point B within the expected period of time.
So what I heard really from everyone was streets that serve a multitude of users, streets that last for the long term, and that get people efficiently and quickly to where they want to be. Some cities around the country are really known for the infrastructure they put in this way. Washington, D.C., New York, San Francisco are all talked about as big bicycle-friendly places that have put the infrastructure in, including barrier-protected bike lanes. And that was one of the questions we've gotten right away. What is your opinion of having a separated, protected bike lane? And do you think it can happen here? What would have to happen to make it a reality? Whoever wants to answer.
Let me take a quick stab at it. In District 6, which I represent, and the northwest part of the city, over time development, which is some of the newer parts of the city that are being developed, there was easement given to accommodate those kinds of build-outs. There are some parts of the city that weren't built out that way, and it's much more difficult to be able to build those separators between pedestrian, bicycle mobility, and automobile mobility. I can tell you that in the SeaWorld area, up in that area, a lot of thought was given over the course of the last 20 years to make sure that we had the ability to do that. But it's been very difficult across the rest of the city to incorporate those kinds of barriers and protected bicycle and pedestrian paths because there just isn't enough easement, and it's incredibly expensive to be able to make it happen. So I think from the city's perspective is making sure that we have some not overly onerous, but rules and regulations that require the development to consider that as we move forward. The big question is going to be, and I don't know how we're going to really deal with it, is how we go back and retrofit the rest of the city to do what it is that we want to be done.
Well, I can give you my thoughts. I agree wholeheartedly. We hear all the time from constituents on one side of the district or another, we want more opportunities to ride our bike places safer. So a separated facility makes total sense. In fact, I wouldn't want a resident to be riding on a street otherwise if there weren't separation on a street, say, that goes 45 miles an hour, Worth Fox Parkway for one. But in other areas where, it's a school zone or it's a very slow-moving street, maybe it doesn't make sense. So I think wherever we can do that, where there's right-of-way, where there's resources, we should be working towards a separated bike facility, but to allow for us to efficiently expand the network, we can't do them in all the places.
Yeah, I think one of maybe inherent in that question is whether we believe the demand will really be there for it, and I think you sort of addressed that in certain parts of the town, yes, and in other parts of town, no, and maybe I'm misreading that, but I think that's what you.
No, absolutely. I mean, it becomes, you know, what is wanted and what can we afford to do. But we are doing some citywide initiatives that, while many of us may think of adding a divided street or a separated street next to or adjacent to those 45-mile-an-hour corridors, we also have our linear parkways that need to serve as a conduit between point A and point B on our streets, where people get off of the street, get into a linear creekway, travel a mile or two or some point down the road, and hop out of that and get back to a transit stop and grab a bus. We're going to have to incorporate that type of network, that type of multi-service transportation conceptually of our community to eventually get to where we want to be.
I think that the question, I agree with that. The question goes back to what it is we're really trying to achieve in the first place. You know, where is our commitment? So if our commitment is true to multimodal, every street isn't going to have the same characteristics as the one block to the north, south, east, or west of it. But if the objective is multimodalism, and that means bike lanes, you have to look at the characteristics of the neighborhood and the street and land around it and find the right place for that. Sometimes that may be based on the geometry of the road, based on traffic patterns, based on the speed and velocity of the vehicle. You may need to protect the lane. You know, if it's a slower, more neighborhood, more local street, maybe you don't need that, and you have to hopefully have the existing right of way. The council is going to provide enough lane width for bikes. Or you look at an alternative if there's very little right of way, you figure out another way. But what it does mean is poor geometry, poor street width, no bike lane. Poor geometry, poor width, no appropriate sidewalk. You know, poor geometry, poor street lane, you know, inefficient lane width for automobiles and buses. The commitment has to start with.
And it's not what I hear you saying is it's not one size fits all. Which is really the purpose of having a comprehensive transportation plan in the first place. What we're embarking on here is to try to figure out the network that does all the right things in the right places, correct?
And let me just add one other thing. A lot of attention is being paid to bicycles, and I think for good reason, because we can move around efficiently in the city when they're utilized properly. But as much attention needs to be paid towards pedestrian facilities, like Daryl said. We see far too many sidewalks being built right up on the curb on streets that are going 50, 60 miles an hour. We need to be talking about separating sidewalks from streets as well, not just bicycles.
So we're going to take a quick pause here for a second. We're going to give you a poll that we'd like you to take, and we're also going to tinker a little bit with the audio here and be back in just a moment. Okay, we are back with our virtual town hall meeting for SA Tomorrow. It looks like most of you have participated in the poll we just asked you to, which was whether or not you've participated in previous SA Tomorrow planning events. It looks like about half of you are first-timers, and so we're thrilled you're with us, and we really appreciate your input. And then it looks like about another fifth, 21%, have participated in 3 or more. So those are the diehards that we are equally appreciative of. So we have a lot of questions that have come in on bikes since we've been talking bikes, but why don't we come back to some of those so we can get to some of the other topics. And Councilman Nirenberg left us off with a comment about pedestrians. One of our participants wants to know what we need to do to improve pedestrian safety. What specifically makes it a safer community to walk in when it comes to designing and building our infrastructure?
Well, and my last comment was focused on experience that we've had in the medical center, and it's growing and it's booming and it's a great place in our community, but it's also got a lot of challenges with regard to how we move people around there, specifically people who have mobility challenges because they're coming out of the hospital, they're new to the area, they're visiting patients and so forth. And what we've found there is that a number of things are happening. One is we're trying to design better sidewalks. So when we've got new construction going in, we're paying a lot closer attention to where those sidewalks are and how we move people on and off of that street. The other part is we sometimes in the codes in San Antonio's development have changed repeatedly over the last 50 years. And so we have some stretches of roadway that have very few crosswalks. And so people are walking across the street just because it's convenient. So we need to make sure that we're understanding how pedestrians actually move throughout our city and design crosswalks around that. And then also upgraded technology. We have great new technologies that relates to on-demand crossing of the street safely and things like that. So I think it's a number of different things. And just like where we left the conversation with bicycles, it's not one size fits all either. There are different sizes of sidewalks, there are different kinds of designs, and certainly there are different kinds of crosswalks depending on what resources are available.
So although I will say, I agree with everything that Ron said, but this is one instance where size does matter a little bit in sidewalks. You know, San Antonio over the years, like a lot of cities across the country, you know, set these minimum sidewalk standards over the decades, and you can see that in the older, some of the older parts of the city, and unfortunately in some of the newer parts of the city, where you've got a 3-foot sidewalk. You know, that may as well not be a sidewalk. It makes it almost, and the councilman said, often right adjacent to the curb on a busy street with traffic going by. You may as well not have a sidewalk in those instances because it makes it that much more dangerous. Again, this goes back to, Jeff, the objective of what we're trying to achieve with sidewalks. Sidewalks in and of themselves are nothing but, concrete, 2-3 feet of concrete. If the objective of the sidewalk is to create a safe place for folks to traverse, if the objective of the sidewalks are to connect neighborhoods, to allow people to move from one place to another, then that changes the outlook on how big those sidewalks are, what our standards are that we hold ourselves to, and our development partners along the way. So size does matter a little bit in the sidewalk case.
And I'd like to add to that to incorporate the same way we want barriers, and we talk about examples in different cities, vegetative bridges, pedestrian-only bridges. I know that seems a little bit outside of the box, literally outside of our loop system in the city, but I'd like us to push ourselves to outside ideas such as those. Because the councilman said it's about incorporating, because we're not going to go destroying all our infrastructure to be able to do it differently. We should have thought about that 30 years ago. But simple solutions, such as building bridges or maybe even modular bridges that are pedestrian only, could be helpful. And this is where I draw upon our public-private partnerships. I feel that the developers are invested into the community, and drawing upon them could be a very positive thing for us to incorporate some in their design and subdivision.
Great. So just
go ahead. No, Jeff, I was just going to comment. I mean, the difficulty with all of this is setting the priorities as to what do we do next. What is the most practical approach to take with that? And I would just, mention one thing that we did years ago, where we had the opportunity to set priorities of getting communities to school safely. It was a Safe Routes to School program funded at the federal level. We're able to draw down dollars specifically to get communities to be able to have kids be able to walk to school. That was a good approach in the beginning, and we ought to have that same type of priority setting. It says whenever I can get people to live, work, and play and use their doorstep to get to some mass transit component, that's a good investment to make. So if we have a mass transit system like that, and we're able to get people from their doorstep via a sidewalk, a safe, wide enough of a sidewalk, be able to get to that location and be able to get onto a mass transit vehicle, when we've added to the continuity. Can't do it everywhere for the entire city at one time, but we can set the priorities where we do it for the most efficient application we use. And I think that would be a good approach to take.
Great. Just a reminder for the folks out in our virtual land here, in addition to typing your questions in, you can raise your hand and we will set you up so you can ask the question verbally. And we are going to answer all questions. We're going to post the answers to questions to the SA Tomorrow website. So please keep sending them. We left off with a comment about prioritization, and this participant asks, how are we going to address all of this when we have roads that are riddled with potholes now, we have sidewalks that are crumbling? In other words, we have a problem keeping up the infrastructure that exists today. So how do you balance that with our aspirations for more complete streets?
Well, I mean, it's easy to say, difficult to do, but it's to set the priorities. Set the priorities based on conditions, on road conditions, as opposed to the person that called and screamed the loudest may not be the one with the most relevant next project. I know that through our different departments at the city, we've done an extensive inventory of all the streets, electronically going in and validating their condition. How deep are the potholes? What condition are they in? Is this a superficial damage, or is it, how far down does it go? And we've got to be able to have an approach that tells us these are the most difficult roads to drive. Those are the ones we have to go after first. I think we've done a pretty good job of that. The issue now becomes finding the dollars to apply to it. And being able to, at a city level, to say, well, we're going to take whatever money we have for streets and road maintenance and divide it by 10 and give it to all districts is probably not the best approach. It has to be the areas that indeed prove out by virtue of inspection, physical inspection, that they're the ones that need the money spent on. There are some parts of the city that are not in terribly bad shape. I talked about my district, in District 6. We have a lot of new asphalt on the ground, a lot of roads that are in good shape. We need to improve them, but there are a lot of segments where the potholes are terrible. So we need to identify, and it can't be as simple as divvy it up between the 10 districts and let's go after it in that approach. We really need to, as a city, identify what the priorities are and then go after the most difficult ones.
A picture says 1,000 words. If you map this, you can use data analytics. You distribute the budget equitably related to the diameter or number of potholes or number of injuries. I feel we use data science for this instead of, political pull or whoever screams aloud. I agree with that.
And I think the tricky balance is how do we also work on capacity issues at the same time we're working on existing infrastructure maintenance issues. And that's why the first question that we received on what makes the best street, well, it's one that you can maintain. So it's exactly the reason why we need to have this discussion about whether it's the bond program or it's the infrastructure maintenance program within the context of the comprehensive plan, because if we continue to do business as usual and we simply address infrastructure maintenance issues and capacity issues the way we have before, we're going to continue to exacerbate a problem. And that's why I think underpinning all of this is this idea of sustainability. It's not an environmental term, it's also a financial sustainability concept. We're trying to build a city and build infrastructure that our children and their children will be able to maintain financially, that will be safe, that will have the right capacity, that we can deal with congestion issues, but it's got to be in a more appropriate mix for a 21st century San Antonio than just cars or just one or two modes of travel.
And we shouldn't, so long as we're talking about the how, we shouldn't also miss some of the basic details here, which are we've been able to address a lot of these issues in recent years through the bond programs that voters have approved, and we'll likely have another one should the council decide to bring it forward to the public in 2017. So the data that you're talking about is what feeds into the community-driven process to decide what roads need to be addressed most urgently, and what resources ultimately we have to put towards it.
Yeah, Jeff, I was also going to say, so public infrastructure, you talk about, this is a transportation forum, but public infrastructure, when you're talking about sidewalks or streets, that's a partnership. So that's not always solely delivered by the public sector, by the city of San Antonio or the county in this instance. It's a partnership with the private sector. You know, when new neighborhoods, kind of beyond the core are built, the public infrastructure is usually built, particularly sidewalks and streets. There's a partnership, and oftentimes they build those. We have the opportunity to make sure we do things right the first time. The councilman talked about sustainability, and I totally agree with that. There's also a word that I would append to that, which is durability. Doing things right, that are sustainable, that are using the right materials, using the right width, planning for the future, making sure we're solving for what it is we most want, so that when time comes when infrastructure, like anything, does deteriorate to some extent, you're not rebuilding it back to the same substandard level of usability that you had before. It's always making sure that your standards are high in the first place.
So let's switch gears for a second. Here's another question about traffic calming tools. How about implementing traffic calming tools to improve bike pedestrian safety and encourage economic revitalization by slowing traffic through areas of small commercial retail businesses? What are your thoughts?
Traffic calming, emotional angering tool, I don't know what defines these. The smart street, is that a traffic calming? I don't really understand it enough, but yes, we can use technology and data science to better manage congestion, but when we're literally busting at the seams, I don't think it's enough to slow down. For safety, the education efforts that the city is doing, I feel, are very important, but there needs to be a reprioritization of infrastructure and management of development and infrastructure to alleviate the problem. Those little tools are, in my opinion, Band-Aids. And yes, they might help, especially in certain areas that we know there's an issue, that the data has showed that there's accidents, there's issues there, then yes, you need to create some change immediately. But other than that, I feel like we need to create infrastructure adjustments and policies through development and growth to manage the situation.
No, I agree with you wholeheartedly, and I think traffic calming, everybody has a different interpretation of what that means. I remember when I first got on council, that was a recommendation that said every time we would ask for speed bumps to slow people down, they would say those are not the most effective traffic calming devices. There are more effective and cheaper. So it's the psychology of drivers. If you put a stripe on the side of a road and give it a narrower definition, people have a tendency of slowing down. So it's the psychology of it, it is much cheaper. If you run diagonal lines across a particular intersection, it gives the impression of slow down, be careful. It isn't the answer, but it certainly can help. And it's really the psychology of people driving behavior. But there's going to come a point in time when, regardless of what psychology we use to manage people's habits, we have got to ask the public to take the responsibility to slow down, to take the responsibility to recognize that they're going to be in a residential area and then drive slower. The most effective traffic calming device that we have in the city of San Antonio drives around in black and white squad cars. And when we expect people to behave in a certain way and don't give them the tools to behave in that way, then we're probably leading them down a bad path. Giving tickets is certainly a traffic calming device. That goes to the psychology of people driving. But people are needing to be educated on what the rules are, how they're going to be enforced, and then we have to encourage them by using these psychological assets on the road, whether they're speed bumps or whatever, to get them to slow down. I say all that to tell you that in the course of my tenure on the MPO, and the MPO, our jurisdiction generally is at a multi-county level. Like we have all the entire county and a couple of other counties to the north and to the northeast of San Antonio. And we talk about a lot of the work that gets done. Most of that work is done on TxDOT roads, or what most people consider highways, the freeways, right? The freeway system. But indeed, TxDOT has responsibility for a lot more than just the freeway system. They also have many of these large city roads that most people think are part of the city's responsibility, but indeed, they're part of TxDOT. I'll give you some real quick examples, which is, for example, Grissom Road, 471. There are a bunch of them that really fall under TxDOT's domain, but people think that they're our responsibility to fix. We're working right now with the state, and it's a collaborative where they are giving us back roads that are not highways, and for us to maintain in that maintenance acceptance that we're going to engage them in, we're also asking them to bring them up to speed, to fix them, make them safe, not only resurface them, but put in curbs and turning lanes and things of that nature. I can assure you that my office gets a lot of calls from people that are saying, you've changed my driving habits. It is dangerous for me to go across that median because now there's a curb there. Well, people need to understand that we're trying to manage those driving behaviors by putting up curbs, and so it's incumbent upon us to make those kinds of investments. We're trying to get that accomplished across the city, the day of any one agency taking responsibility for it is over. It's got to be a collaborative of initiatives. It's got to be TxDOT. It's got to be the city. It's got to be the county. It's got to be multiple jurisdictions because none of us can afford to do it all.
Right. Yeah, and I think the getting it right the first time is important, meaning what is the right geometry of the street, meaning the width, what are the right speeds, how do you design the land uses around it that all contribute to the right behavior up front, and then doing the same thing when it's time to go back and see your example with the TxDOT rights of way, when you go back and have a second shot at the street, doing it right. Traffic calming may work in some instances, but that's kind of what I would call a middle of the behavior fix. And I know that my human relationships, every time I've tried to tell somebody in the middle of a behavior, calm down, it never works well. They always get more agitated, more excited. So I don't know how much traffic calming really works when you're already kind of in the middle of it, but designing it out up front where the streets already encourage that type of psychology to take more caution, to be aware of your surroundings, shorter blocks, all kind of different things that just automatically encourage you to slow down. You can do those things up front.
And just very quickly, the traffic calming handbook for the city of San Antonio is on the website, but there's caution advised when reading that because misapplied traffic calming devices can be some of the most dangerous things on the road.
Right. So let's switch to a question about transit, and I just want to add a little personal thought. There was VIA just rolled out a blue route through the holiday season, which takes people from Southtown to the Pearl and back. They're just running it through the holiday season. I took my kids on it this weekend, and granted it had just launched Friday, but we got on one Saturday and thought this is perfect. And my son said, "Dad, we're the only people on the bus." And I looked around and thought, you know what, you're right. So this question is really relevant. How can we get more people to use transit, to use it as a transportation mode of choice, not of absolute need?
I've always considered transit, and I represent the northwest area of town where it's quick access to I-10 and a number of different routes into downtown or wherever else you want to go. But we also have some of the most significant traffic congestion, as Councilman Lopez does. For me, this has always been an infrastructure issue. One of the reasons why folks don't use I-10, for instance, to get or a bus to get down I-10 is that it's not going to get you any faster or any more convenient. In fact, it's going to take you longer than a regular car. So we have to begin to prioritize transit options in the infrastructure design of our streets, whether it's a managed lane, it's an HOV lane, or it's a transit priority lane, until we can actually have facilities for transit vehicles to use that make it more convenient, more cost-effective, allow you to use the Wi-Fi on VIA's buses. For the average San Antonian, I think we're going to still continue to be fighting this headwind. And then there's a great conversation that Councilman Saldana has begun at the city to talk about, well, let's take a look at our actual bus stops, the terminal points of our bus system and our VIA system. we don't have much access there because one of the reasons is VIA has one of the largest service areas in the entire state of Texas, and we also have one of the lowest sources of funding. That's not to say we know how to solve that problem yet, but it is an issue because we have a huge service area and not a whole lot of resources to use to cover it.
Yeah, Ron, you're absolutely right, and I think that discussion merits a lot more thoughtful debate with the community as to how we might be able to set those priorities. Much like what I was referring to earlier when a decade ago we defined safe routes to school as a priority. We also need to do safe routes to work, safe routes to live, safe routes to play. If I can get you from your front door to wherever you're going in a safe method, if I can get you to a bus stop to get to work, to get to live, to get to play, people are going to take it. So convenience is what's going to drive that use. It's not there today. We don't have solid connectivity between front doors that use the bus and bus stops. We got to fix it.
So I think we have someone raising their hand in our virtual town hall here asking a question about VIA. So while we're on the topic, let's cue that up. Okay. Jason, are you on the line? I think he might have just hailed a bus when we got to him. Sorry about that. We'll try it again, Jason, so hang with us. Another question from Paul via Twitter is, does San Antonio need toll roads? We've been talking a lot about the constrained resources here and our abilities to address all of these issues. Do we need toll roads to generate new revenues?
I'll jump onto that one. The question is, do we need toll roads? Tolling is a revenue source. I think, when people get a little bit flustered, I think when people start talking about tolls because of the way they're presented, but the reality is just a funding source. It's a user fee. Do we pay for roads with toll roads? Users pay for that. Do we pay for roads with a bond issue? Well, we can't raise enough bond money to build the roads we need to build, so that's probably not a legitimate option. Can we rely on the state to give us money? Well, last year we had Proposition 1, and this year Proposition 7 passed. That brings some money into the community. That's a good start, but again, not going to get all the work done. We've got opportunities to draw down federal dollars, at the federal level, but again, those are hard to come by, slow in coming. The issue becomes, do we need more revenue? Tolls are a revenue-generated source. Do we need them? We need them as much as we need to address our traffic problems. Again, I think the problem becomes, the four-letter word toll gets a really bad rap, but really it's just a funding source. It's one of many. Right now, we've been fortunate enough to be able to get Prop 7 to pass. I think most people, because in the 80s percentage of success for Prop 7 this past November, which tells us that people are willing to spend money, dollars on transportation. Part of that agreement that the MPO signed a resolution to that Ron joined me in signing was that we wouldn't use toll roads for finishing out the 281 project. And we did that simply because our leadership at the state level asked if we were to be able to pass that, would we be willing to forego tolling that road? And we said, of course, we'd be willing to do that. We're going to get money for it. The issue becomes, if we're taking $300 million out of the 281 allocation and taking it out of play and supplanting it, we're not adding more capacity with it. We're just taking $300 million off of the constrained commitment that we had for 281 and replacing it with non-toll dollars. We could have taken those $300 million and built a lot of infrastructure on roads that are not going to be able to be funded. So sure they have a place.
In the toll debate belies the fact that even under that scenario, any scenario that we've come up with so far with regard to funding roads in San Antonio doesn't get us all the way there. It doesn't even get close to all the way there in terms of the deferred maintenance and the need to build capacity. So that's why we're in this discussion to talk about how we can do transportation differently. It's not just going to be about building roads.
So managing that infrastructure again, as I use the word, as we're busting at the seams, we'll have to include incentives and decentives beyond the infrastructure related to development and growth, related to employer incentives. For example, UTSA, Valero, USAA, I drive there to the university every day. Those three employers, if they can alternate schedules or create a different mode of scheduling or work together, they can move a whole lot of people on that side of town. So we have to think a little bit differently about transportation. Because again, had we thought about it 30 years ago, like you always say, we have to do it twice the first time around, we didn't project the growth that we're seeing in San Antonio. In a sense, we're blessed. We have this growth, but we also need to figure it out.
Great. We're going to try this again with our friend raising his hand here. This is Daniel Palomo, who has a question. Daniel, can you hear us now? Daniel, go ahead. All right, we'll keep trying. We've got plenty of questions though to work through, and as a cyclist and mountain biker, I love this one, which is in many of the older neighborhoods, alleys exist that are not utilized. Why not use these for hike and bike trails since the right-of-way isn't always there?
I think that's an interesting idea, which is why we're here, to get as many ideas from people other than four of us sitting here. But, you know, alleys are in some cases used for service. In old neighborhoods in San Antonio, I live on a street that's got alley access and have for many years. You can get beyond the service issues related to trash pickup and very narrow rights of way, and you know the poor maintenance of the infrastructure in the alleys. I mean, it could be a good option and a good idea as another choice.
That's why we need the public-private partnerships, because I think it's a great idea, but then who's going to have the liability? Who's going to, be liable if something happens? Who owns that alley? And those questions come to play when you come up with great ideas that are not typical. There's
been a discussion at the legislature the last couple of years about removing the liability for power companies who have easements. If they open those up to trails for the public, can they be the liability removed from them if someone is hurt or something?
Yeah, so that's one of the major issues behind that.
So back to the bikes for a minute. How does the city determine whether a bike lane should be installed, a bike lane, versus a shared use path? When the council members want to take that one on?
Well, the question is, how do we decide between one and the other?
Right. I'm assuming if there's a road that we've decided bike infrastructure makes sense, how do we determine a bike lane versus a path?
I'm going to oversimplify it, but it really isn't simple. Once we define the volume and the number of people that are going to be transported, it makes a difference how we transport. And I think that will make the difference between one type of facility versus another. So, I mean, it's the medium and how many people are going to move. One is a preferable one over the other. But I think across the board, based on the volume of the people that we're going to be transporting, is what determines one versus the other. I don't think there's somebody sitting up there and say, I like this, or there's a preference for one or the other. It really has to do with the volume of transport, or the number of people who are transporting.
So speaking of volume, I asked the question earlier whether we thought there was demand, and sure enough, someone is jumping on me here and saying, how can the demand be there if there isn't anywhere to ride a bike yet? In other words, is there a latent demand that we're not seeing until the infrastructure is put in? What are your thoughts about that?
I'm going to make an analogy that has nothing to do with transportation, but it relates to growth. 5 to 10 years ago, if you look at the core of the city of San Antonio, there was probably 10, 20 years of non-growth of housing within the core of the city. I think the city was sitting on somewhere around less than 3,000 housing units for a couple of decades in the core of the city, not just central business districts, but kind of going out a little bit north, south, east, and west. And today, that number is more than doubled and continuing to grow. There were many people that said there was no demand for that at the time. Well, it wasn't a matter of there being no demand; there was no product. So people were moving to the city, but they had no choices. So they were living in other parts of the, other neat parts of the city, but they didn't have the choice to live there. So a specific objective was set by thousands of citizens, and the city of San Antonio took up that banner and led to prioritize investment in the core of the city in terms of housing, and that's yielded, thousands and thousands of housing units, and the demand is being met in a big way. I think, most of those developments are, 80% leased and up, if not more than that. So the demand is there, and I have an intuitive sense as a cyclist too that is probably there as well for bike lane.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that we've done at the MPO from a multi-county perspective is to give a stronger voice to the population of bicyclists and pedestrian mobility. We have two very important committees that report to the MPO, which is the pedestrian mobility and the bicycle mobility committees. Recently, when we restructured, we gave them a stronger voice. We expect them to give us ideas. We expect them, for example, tomorrow, December the 1st, we have what they call a call for projects, where we have about $100 million worth of revenue that we're going to distribute across the board on the projects, and we ask all of our stakeholders to bring projects to us that we might be able to consider funding. $100 million sounds like an awful lot of money, and it would be if it was in my checking account. I say that oftentimes. When you talk about building infrastructure across the entire multi-county area, it's not very much money. What we're asking for is innovative ways that we will be able to spend dollars, and that they can tell us this will affect more riders, whether they're walkers, bicyclists, or automobile riders. That's what we're looking for. Give us ideas that we'll be able to address the highest volume so we can get throughput, so we can get people from home to work, home to play, home to live. I mean, that's what we're looking for, and the only way we're going to be able to get that, I think we all, in one way or another, articulate this, is to get community input. If the community sits back and just folds their arms and criticizes, we're not going to get anywhere, because collectively we don't have all the answers. But forums like this, forums like we've had over the course of the last 2 years, continuing to empower the community to tell us what they want, and then we'll figure out a way to get it done. Then we'll go back and validate with it, I think, is the only way we can be effective.
Sorry to interrupt you, Councilman. Here's a perfect opportunity for that input. We're going to pause for a quick second poll here. We were talking all about tonight, and this question is among the three criterion on the screen, which is most important in terms of project prioritization? Which of the the top three criterion for prioritizing projects? We want to hear from you, and we'll be back in just a moment. Okay, welcome back. It appears we have our top three. They are quality of life, mobility, and safety and security are the three most important criterion that you tell us we need to consider when prioritizing projects. So we have just a little bit of time left. Great question to end on, but before that, an even better question because it comes from a Boy Scout who is at the Johnston Library right now. The Boy Scout wants to know, can San Antonio have an underground subway?
It would take a very healthy check to accomplish that. Having lived in places on the East Coast, I would say it would be a wonderful thing. You don't have to worry about what's happening on top of the ground. But at this point, our story has been written, best I can tell. If it could be done, we should be thinking about it.
All right, so let's end with this one as we wrap up our evening. This person said what I think reflects the feelings of a lot of people, perhaps, which is, are we really thinking multimodal? I'd love to think we are, but I can't believe it when I look at the streets today. In other words, we have a long way to go. Can we really do this? I'd like all four of you to address that, if you would.
Well, I think first of all, let me say that the answer is absolutely good. We, as a community, have taken the challenge to make it happen. The difficult part is setting the priorities of what we do first. And the ones that are bubbling up to the top are those things that we've been talking about tonight. The difficult ones are the ones that we won't be able to get to for a while. And that could be a significant period of time, 5, 8, 10 years, simply because the funding just can't be made available to make it all happen. So yeah, I think we absolutely can make it happen. But let's talk a little bit about the consequences and the severe consequence of us not taking the multimodal approach.
If we just remain an automobile only.
If we just stay where we are and just say, hey, listen, we've done everything we could. We fold our arms and say, we're trying, but we just can't get there. The consequences are that 50 years from now, I hope to be here, but I probably won't. That generation is going to be saying, what were they thinking about when they were putting all those cars on the street, polluting all the air that we're breathing today? Or we're counting how many days we're not in ozone alert versus the handful that we're in ozone dangerous states. I mean, 50 years from now, we won't have the quality of life from an air quality perspective for us to have a community. The consequences of not being cognizant of transportation. By the way, transportation is one of the two top contributors to poor air quality. The other one is coal-burning power plants. We're getting ready to retire our coal-burning power plant here in southeast San Antonio. The other one is transportation, and the consequences of not doing it are just untenable. So we have got to do it. I'm committed to do it. I know Councilman Nierenberg and the rest of you are committed to doing it, and the entire community needs to get together and figure out how to continue these forums, continue the dialogue, set the priorities, and accelerate it to the best we can. Councilman Nierenberg.
I have a deep and abiding belief that this is not the same city that we were in even 15 years ago. That people have come around to the notion that gas is no longer 98 cents. That congestion doesn't mean it takes now 25 minutes. It takes more like 45 minutes. Congestion, it's only getting worse. The realities of funding, as Councilman Lopez says, it takes many more agencies to do one job as it did years ago. I think people are coming around to this new reality of transportation, that we can't simply talk about cars and building capacity anymore. And I think that I will believe it when I see it. I think we need to put our money where our mouths are. But I think most importantly in that equation, though, is people need to put their voices where their mouths are and begin to start voting, begin to start getting involved in town halls like this, really speak out about the kind of community they want San Antonio to become. Transportation is at the very foundation of it. And so if you want to see a new San Antonio, you have to tell 10 of your neighbors to go listen to a program or to come talk to you about what you would like to see. Because if we don't, we will continue to see status quo. And that's just because that's the way political realities are. If we don't have enough people wanting change to happen, it'll just be same old in San Antonio. That's not the San Antonio I want to live in. That's not the San Antonio I know my son wants to live in. And that's why we're here, is to try to change that.
Dr. Elnicott?
For me, multimodal, which I do hope that we can figure out who's going to pay for it and how, to me that is the challenge really, is not just about the modes of transportation. It's about multi-people, because different people have different needs. I don't bike, but I want you to be able to bike. I like to walk, but I don't have those pedestrian fancy vegetative bridges. So I want multi-people transportation in this city, because in this city, our microcosm of tomorrow's America, we have different people that have different needs, and I want them to voice their opinions and to ask the different questions and to push us outside of the typical engineering design. We have a lot of engineering solutions. Help us prioritize them. And to me, again, it's not just about air quality. It's about air quality. It's about stormwater that's being carried on these streets. It's about noise pollution. It's about drinking and driving. It's about all these health and safety issues that, again, when my daughter grows up, I want them to be figured out. And we need to start doing it many, many years ago. But right now, our time is invested in this. We need all the ideas. We need all your participation. One person can't fix the problem. None of us can pay for it. But I think collectively, at least we can make a little bit of impact.
And I would say that I like the way the gentleman phrased the question, can we? So I would kind of turn it back on him. He says, can we have multimodalism? I'd say, I don't know. Can we? It depends on if you're serious, and thousands of other San Antonians are serious about this happening. The theme you've heard throughout this entire conversation from those of us here is that none of these exciting innovations and more efficient ways of connecting our neighborhoods that we could do will ever come about if the voters, the shareholders essentially of the city of San Antonio aren't serious about these things happening. There are too many distractions. There are too limited resources. We have to prioritize. But that starts with what the citizens see as valuable. So the question is, I don't know. Do we really think multimodalism is valuable? Are we willing to have the stick-to-itiveness over years and years and years when we go to vote for our elected officials and hold them accountable for multimodalism and making the smart decisions and allocating resources properly to make that happen? Are we willing over years or perhaps even decades to make the same votes with discipline when we go and vote for hundreds of millions of dollars worth of bond projects? Are we looking at multimodalism as a goal? Are we holding ourselves accountable over time? If not, everything gets diluted and, we'll wake up 10, 15, 20 years in the year, 15 years in the year 2040, and we're going to have the same city of San Antonio. I don't think any of us will be proud of that, and it certainly won't be the extraordinary city that we know we can be in 15 years.
Well, we have an audience and friends who have spent an hour with us this evening asking questions, listening, and talking about transportation. They are the great place to start in terms of advocating with their friends. We're very grateful for all of you in participating and joining us here tonight. You can follow SA Tomorrow on a number of ways on social media, on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram. We really hope you'll continue to be a part of the dialogue with us. Reminder, we're going to answer all the questions that were asked tonight, even if we didn't get to them during this hour. They'll be posted on satomorrow.com. And one more reminder, there's a bike survey that's been out there for a few weeks now and is still out there for a few weeks more, I believe. Wednesday, this week is the last week to respond to that. So that is at satomorrow.com/survey. Please take the bike survey if you have an interest and want to share your opinions and thoughts. Again, thank you and have a great night, and we look forward to San Antonio of tomorrow.